least two things in the paper, the questions that you are going to address, and go easy on the literature review. Many people on a short time, they end up still staying on literature until the last 1 minute. They're going to jump to conclusion. So do not do that. Skip literature if you can. Spend time on methods and the results. And it's customary to talk about policy implications when the work is in the nature of work in progress. The conclusions and the policies are tentative. So keep that in mind. So we don't need to spend a lot of time on that. Most of the time, if it's junior researchers' work, pre-publication, you have to treat them as a work in progress. So with that, I turn to the presentation. So we'll go in the order that's here. There are 5 presenters. I think all are available, 3 online and 2 in person. Given that our first speaker is from Nepal, and I'm pretty sure he is not speaking Bengali, so that would be out of respect for him, we should try to speak as much as possible in English. You can ask questions in Bengali of anyone, and if necessary, you can translate that. But the overall, they can be both in English and Bangla, but try to speak more English than Bangla. So I would first ask then Shiva Raj Paudel, that's the correct pronunciation. Okay, and he's looking at the common stock returns in Nepalese stock market. Yes. So you have 10 minutes. Oh, yeah.
I can hear presentation already.
If you wish to go there.
The presentation already there.
So you just have to go with this forward and this goes back.
Warm good afternoon, all the representative here. Very warm good afternoon, all the representative here, all the delighted personalities presented here. Me, Sivaraj Paudel from Nepal. Sir. First of all, I would like to thank SANEM conference team for providing me this opportunity of presenting my paper entitled Impact of Macroeconomic Variables on Common Stock Returns from the Nepali Capital Market. Whenever we talk about the capital market, there is an important question among the investor is which assets or portfolio of the assets is the best for the future return. And this question probably as old as the capital market itself. And still it is important as it was in the beginning of the market. And as a financial economic student, we all know that capital market has the fluctuating nature. And that is the beauty of the capital market itself. And if there is the fluctuating nature in the market, the future return future return is uncertain. And if there is the uncertain future return, that means there is the chances of losses, and such chances of losses can be termed as the market risk. And still, by knowing that there is the huge risk in the market, still investment have been doing in the capital market by expecting that the risks may be compensated by the risk premium in the future. So risk return trade-off in the capital market or in the finance literature, never ending story, or it is a complex phenomenon. Different scholars and the academicians have determined the major factors that affect the common stock return. Based on these studies, this study focuses on how far the common stock returns is being affected by the very small capital market, affected by the macroeconomic variables from the small capital market like Nepal. So the major objective of this study is to examine the impact of such macroeconomic variables on common stock return For this study, we have determined the dependent and independent variable. We have dependent variable is common stock return, and we divided the common stock return into three measures. One is capital gain yield, dividend yield, and the total yield. These are the dependent variable used for the study. And for independent variable, we have GDP growth rate, customer price index as the proxy of inflation rate, money supply, government treasury bill as the proxy of the short-term interest rate, and the lending rate as the proxy of the long-term interest rate. So based on the literature, we have formulated the hypothesis that GDP growth rate and the money supply have the significant positive impact on common stock return. In contrast to this, customer price index, government treasury bill, and the lending rate have the significant negative impact on common stock return. That is the expected result which will come from the study. If we talk about the research design, we use causal comparative research design and the descriptive research design. Descriptive research design was used to describe the different phenomena of the study, of the variables used in the study, and the causal comparative research design was used to identify the magnitude of impact of independent variable to dependent variable. And whole study is completely based on secondary sources of data. All the data relating to market return or relating to market were collected from the secondary market, which is known as the NEPSE in Nepal Stock Exchange, and the data relating to macroeconomic variables have been collected from the data source of Nepal Rashtra Bank, which is the central bank of Nepal. And we use 48 firms as the sample. And for the cross-sectional perspective, we divided all 48 samples into different stratified units. So stratified and purposive sampling method have been used, and data set covers mid-July 2011 to 2022, including with the 576 observations. And this table summarizes the breakdown of the of the sample forms, without wasting time. And in order to address the sampling error, I have conducted correlation analysis, and all the breakdown returns has the highly positive correlation with the market return. That's why there is no any problem of sampling error. We use three types of dependent variable that we have already discussed, and the set of macroeconomic variables that is clearly shown in the model. The analysis is divided into three groups, three subsections. One is descriptive statistics, correlation analysis, and regression analysis. Without wasting time, I want to describe in short. This table describes the different phenomena of the study of the variables used. For sample, I want to describe only one, capital gain yield. Capital gain yield ranges from minimum -69.4% to maximum 1042.1%, with mean 22.5% and standard deviation 99.1. The high standard deviation confirms that there is a high risk in the market, in the Nepali capital market, and similarly for the other variables too. This table summarizes the correlation between the variables, and without describing this, I will describe the regression analysis. That is the major analysis for the study. From this analysis, what we confirmed that the regression coefficient of GDP growth and consumer price index have the significant positive impact on all three proxies, not all, in majority of the proxies of a dependent variable. That means common stock return. So what we conclude that GDP growth rate and consumer price index have the significant positive impact. Similarly, in the case of money supply, there is the significant positive impact only on dividend yield, not in the capital gain yield and the total yield. And in contrast to this, government treasury bill, that is the proxy of short-term interest rate, And the lending rate, that is the proxy of the long-term interest rate, have the significant negative impact on common stock return in Nepali capital market. Similarly, I have conducted the study for the stratified units, which is banking and financial institutions, insurance companies, and other samples also. Due to the time constraints, I want to skip these slides. And this table shows the expected results and the observed result that we have already discussed. And I will describe all these findings within the 2 sentences in coming slide. Yes, this is the conclusion of this table. So I want to describe these 2 points. The conclusion of my study is GDP growth rate, consumer price index, and the money supply have the significant positive impact on common stock return. Unlike this, or in the contrast, government treasury bill rate and the lending rate both have the significant negative impact on common stock return in Nepali capital market. That is the conclusion of my study. And we have some limitations too. In literature, we found commonly used unemployment rate and the foreign direct investment are the independent variables. We can finalize this within 1 minute. And due to the data unavailability, I excluded unemployment rate from the analysis, and foreign direct investment was excluded from the analysis due to the multicollinearity problem. That is, BIF was greater than 10. That's why this variable was excluded from the analysis. So for the implication, all the people or all the investors who want to invest in the Nepali capital market should focus not in the individual stock or assets, but by considering macroeconomic factor which affect on the overall economy of the country. That is the conclusion of my study.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Our second speaker is Afsara Tasnim,
Okay.
and she's speaking about interest rate shock on the economy of Bangladesh. So the same goes that try to focus on your methods and your questions rather than literature. Thank you. It's only just to be able to present in 10 minutes.
That's right.
Okay, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to present. I am Afsara Tasnim. Today, I am going to present a topic on macroeconomic issues titled as the responsiveness of macroeconomic variables to interest rate shock on the economy of Bangladesh, a structural vector autoregulation approach. So to set the stage for our discussion, I will provide some background and outline of our objective. Bangladesh follows a monetary targeting framework with the primary goal of achieving price stability and ensure financial system robustness. Bangladesh Bank, the country's central bank, implements the monetary policy by adjusting interest rate and money supply. Modern central bank target interest rate to control economic fluctuation, which is considered to be more effective. Earlier, Bangladesh Bank has maintained low level of interest rate to support adequate credit flows. For example, interest rate cap. However, such a policy might stimulate short-term growth. It may have broader macroeconomic consequences. So on this note, that this study attempts to evaluate the responsiveness of major macroeconomic aggregates to monetary policy shock, which is negative interest rate shock. Since there are a few studies found in this field, for developing countries like Bangladesh, this study contributes to the existing literature on forming macroeconomic policies. The yearly data are sourced from World Development Indicators published by World Bank website, which covers the period 1976 to 2020. The variables in this analysis include real GDP, real consumption, real investment, exchange rate, inflation, and lending rate. For estimation purposes, all the data except the lending rate are converted into logarithmic form. So this figure shows some graphical representation of my time series variables. And we can see that Bangladesh at the beginning of 1990 experienced quite satisfactory robust growth in various macroeconomic indicators, for example, GDP, consumption, investment. However, price level over the years steadily increased and the value of taka depreciated against the US dollar. Since I have used time series data, the variables have to be stationary. So this study will conduct augmented decay-Fuller unit root test for stationarity. And this study applied a structural VAR model, which analyzes relationship between macroeconomic time series, which allows simultaneous causality. SVAR is commonly used in macroeconomics to analyze the effects of structural shock. Here you can see that Xt is the vector of variables included in the analysis. And equation 1 is the SVAR model equation, where error term is the vector of structural shock. And the second equation represents the reduced from VAR, where the error term is reduced from errors. Now we need to identify the structural shocks from the reduced from VAR to match the theoretical counterparts. And the restriction and identification scheme in this study, I assumed recursive identification structure, which is called Cholesky decomposition. And the ordering is based on existing literature. And we can see that real GDP is placed on top of order, which implies that real GDP is the most exogenous variable. And exchange rate is placed at the last, which implies that it is the most endogenous variable. And this is our matrix representation of our SVAR model. And we can see that as we assume that real GDP as an exogenous shock, it means it has contemporaneous effect on all the other variables. But we can see that in the last equation, where exchange rate is considered as the most endogenous variable, it has no contemporaneous effect on the other variables. And finally, the impulse response function. IRF helps us graphically to observe the response of macroeconomic variables over the period to one standard deviation shock to the exogenous variable, which is here is lending rate. So in the result section, we can see that the first table describes the summary statistics of the variables. We can see that there is considerable variation exist among the variables. And the second graph shows us the ADF unit root test. We can see that all the variables are non-stationary at level, but they become stationary at their first difference. And they both all are integrated at the same order. And this panel shows the response of major macroeconomic aggregates to one standard deviation negative shock to interest rate. We can see that one standard deviation negative interest rate shock led most of the macroeconomic variables to respond immediately. And we can see that initially real GDP and real consumption respond to this shock positively. These variables increases and gradually taking a hump-shaped fashion. However, in this panel, we can see the investment initially declines. It tends to rise, peaking at the second period with a hump-shaped pattern. And we can see the price level, GDP deflator, which is a measure of inflation, rises initially. And exchange rate, the value of local currency against currency tends to depreciate over the period. And we can see that the effect of the shock vanishes after a certain period. So we can tell from the observation that one standard deviation negative lending rate shock causes most of the macroeconomic variables to respond immediately. And we can also, it is evident that significant short-run impact from our estimated impulses, where real GDP and real consumption respond positively. However, price level increases and the value of domestic currency falls over the period due to this shock. And the effect of the shock vanishes after a certain period.
The negative shock is a interest rate increase.
No, interest rate decrease.
Decrease is a negative shock.
So in conclusion, we can say that our results reveal that expansionary monetary policy through reducing interest rate aimed at stimulating investment has led to high inflation and depreciation pressures. So certainly there is a trade-off for the central bank. So this study suggested a comprehensive policy approach that integrates fiscal incentives like tax break or tax holiday with flexible interest rate policies to foster sustainable investment and ensure macroeconomic stability. And these insights can assist policymakers in Bangladesh and other developing countries in developing effective monetary strategies to achieve long-term growth and macroeconomic stability. Thank you. This is all.
Thank you. Thank you, Afsara. So we now have to go for the online presentations. And first
I'm
up is the
I'm just wondering
paper
if
by
I can run the
joint
slide
paper
from my
by
end.
Sarah Yunus and Ripon Roy. So I believe Ripon Roy is supposed to be presenting. Dr. Ripon Roy, Bangladesh Bank. You have 10 minutes.
Sir, can you share your screen?
Yep.
Ripon Roy, can you hear us?
Yep. Can you see my slides? And can you hear me?
I can hear you. And I can also see the slide.
Somebody else.
Dr. Ripon Roy, we cannot hear you. I think you are muted.
But my
No,
mic is working. It's unmuted.
But we can't hear him. I think your audio is has from no, it's not problem.
It's unmuted from my
Hello.
end.
I can hear Ripon Roy.
Can you hear us?
I can hear you all, and my mic is unmuted.
Headphone.
Somebody else is
It should be.
Speakers.
Can you hear us now?
Yeah, I can hear you all.
Okay.
Do you want me to go on with the presentation?
If you kindly speak once more, because something is,
So I think I could increase the volume of this laptop.
but the audience will not be able to hear them.
So it's connected to the speaker.
No, I can hear you.
yeah.
Ripon Roy, I can hear all.
Yeah, it should be okay.
In that
because
case,
my
we
mic
go to
is
the
Yeah, it's a problem
next
from
speaker
your end,
while this is being
Sanem end. The problem.
Ripon Roy has been connected.
Online
Really? Okay.
Dr. Ripon, can you speak now?
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now. Yeah.
So should I go on?
Just 1 minute. Can you hear us?
Yeah.
Okay,
It's all
good.
good for me.
You can start speaking. You have 10 minutes. And everyone, please go to your methods, questions and methods rather than literature. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for the opportunity. And this is an ongoing work, so I will appreciate any comments, suggestions. It's a joint work with Dr. Sarah Yunus, who also works with me in Bangladesh Bank. She's the executive director of the research department. So as you can see from the title, our paper explored the time-varying causality between money supply growth and inflation in Bangladesh. And it starts with the quantity theory of money, some very simple idea of quantity theory of money. So if you see the traditional quantity theory of money, it argues that there exists a unitary relationship between money supply growth and inflation. When there is an increase in money supply growth, inflation rises. Some of the literature, like Brown and Pigo, they argued that the price level moves in the same direction in proportion with the money supply. But what is happening in the recent literature? If you browse the recent literature, you'll see that the causal links between money supply and growth, inflation growth, it's dynamic. It's not following a constant pattern. That means it may be significant for some time, it may not be significant for some time. So let's see the context of Bangladesh. Here we have plotted money supply growth, that's the broad money growth, and inflation rate in Bangladesh. You will see that they are not following the classical relationship pattern. That means sometimes when money supply is declining, inflation is increasing. So I want to plot. So particularly in this area, you can see that it's not following the relationship classical, but it's happening here, and particularly in this area. So from this graph, we can argue that the relationship is not holding in classical way, but also is it significant? That means, is it statistically significant for particular point of time? So these new techniques, which is developed by Baum in 2023 paper, that helps us to identify whether this relationship is significant for a particular sample horizon and whether it not sustains after that. So that's the basic idea of our paper. So this is the initial result from our data from the empirical literature, which suggests there is a weak Granger causal relationship between money supply growth and inflation, which is significant at 10% level. Now we are using the algorithm that's developed by Baum, and they have proposed 3 algorithms. That's forward expanding, rolling window, and recursive evolving algorithm. So these 3 algorithms helps us to identify whether these relationship are significant for a particular sample or not. And why that's important? Because it's important for the policymakers to know that, because if it's significant for a particular time period, and what factors could lead to this significant relationship. If the regulators can identify those, then it's more meaningful to implement the policies and formulate as well. So this is the result from the 3 algorithms. And you can see that if we consider the causal relationship from broad money growth to inflation, the first algorithm, that's forward expanding, that's suggesting no Granger causal relationship. So the numbers in parentheses and bracket, they are representing 5% and 1% significant values. So the values are, the calculated value is less than that for forward expanding. So what's happening with rolling window and recursive evolving? So in both cases, we can see that there is a significant relationship from broad money growth to inflation, as the calculated value is more than the 5% and 1% level of significant value. Similarly, what's happening from the reverse causal relationship, that means from inflation are lower than the 1% values that are in the bracket. So in that case, we can see that there is some evidence that there is a causal relationship from broad money growth to inflation.
You have 5 more minutes.
Yep. So here we have plotted the significant relationship. So you can see the 2 lines. That's the upper line is showing the 1% critical, 5% critical value, and the bottom line is showing the 10% critical value. So how to read this graph? So if the line is above the 2 horizontal lines, the relationship are significant. If they are below the 2 lines, then they are not significant in that level of significance. So what you can see from graph B and C, you can see that there is a significant pattern of causality that's coming from broad money growth to inflation, particularly in 2 sample periods. One is starting from 2006 to 2010, and another in, you can see that in 2019, possibly in the graph, you can see that there is the significant pattern is coming. So why it's happening? You can see that there are some domestic events, particularly in 2007-8, there are a regime change, and particularly the 2008 financial crisis. So that period, and in 2019, the COVID pandemic happens. So what we are suggesting is that there are some instabilities in the economy at national level or global level. Then this pattern of relationship becomes significant. And some of the literature, like Eroglu in Turkey, particularly during the revolution that happened against Erdogan, they also supported that kind of evidence. But this is very preliminary findings. So we are still working on that. Then we have also tried to do the analysis at disaggregated level. For example, what's happening with food inflation, non-food inflation, core inflation. Because what's true for the central bank, they argue that inflation, or particularly the non-food inflation, is more connected with the monetary policy tools, particularly money supply, compared to the food inflation and fuel inflation. So we also have those results, but we are not showing the results here. So at disaggregated level, we have food, non-food, and particularly the sample horizons where this relationship is significant, that's more extended for non-food compared to food inflation. So I have already briefed the results. So what it implies for the policymaker. So if the relationship is particularly significant for a particular sample period, then the policymaker can concentrate what's happening in that sample period to devise policies that how can control
Sorry, Mr. Ripon, we can't hear you right now. জি,
উনি বলেন যে এটা লাইনে থাকবে।
Dr. Ripon, are you done? I think উনি conclusion দিয়েছে. I think he is done.
Yeah.
লাইনে থাকেন এবং they may have questions and answers, discussions, review. Stay on the line. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
So again, without any delay, we go to the next presenter. And there are two speakers, two authors from Aligarh Muslim University, Abdul Moiz and Dr. Javed Akhtar. And they are speaking about the Indian stock market and the policy uncertainty. And I should say that I owe the Aligarh Muslim University thanks for hosting me some years ago. And I remember their hospitality extremely well. So welcome. Please, we'll be happy to see you in person, but if you're not able to come, we'll be happy to hear you long distance. So please, you have 10 minutes.
Thank
you very much, sir.
Share the screen?
Thank you very much, sir. Am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
Okay, thank you. So a very good afternoon to all of you. I'm Abdul Muiz, and the title of my paper is Asymmetric Nexus between the Economic Policy Uncertainty and the Indian Stock Market and the Presence of Structural Breaks, Evidence Using the Nonlinear ARDL Model. So in this study, basically, we are investigating that how the positive and negative in the stock market and the presence of structural break, and that is COVID-19 in our case. So as we know that the stock market of any nation reflect the functioning of its economy and the expectations of the economic agents. And this expectation of the economic agents alter whenever there is some kind of financial turmoil happen or economic shock happen, or there may be a reform. And notably, the globalization has opened the door to the rapid transmission of these uncertain events across the national boundaries. In addition to this, there are always some kind of domestic instabilities and macroeconomic fluctuations within the countries. So these both global and domestic extreme events force the government and policymakers to intervene substantially in the economic system and implement policy-related solutions. So these policy-related solutions further generate the policy uncertainty in the economy. And this is known as the economic policy uncertainty. So Baker, in 2016, Baker, Bloom, and Davis, they have designed an index which is known as the economic policy uncertainty index. And this basically captures the uncertainty arising from unpredictable economic, monetary, and fiscal policy changes. So it measures policy-related uncertainty in the economy by analyzing how often certain keywords appear in the newspaper articles about the unpredictable policy changes. And these keywords are uncertain, uncertainty, monetary policy, policymakers, fiscal policy, and so on. So as you can see in the figure, we can clearly see here that there is an inverse relationship between the policy uncertainty in India and the stock prices, the prices of the Sensex. So, and you can also see the COVID period here, which is shown as the bar, that time the economic policy uncertainty is too high, and the stock prices are falling down. So these are some of the papers which I have included in my paper. So I will, due to time constraint, I am ignoring these two slides. So what is the need for the study? So existing body of empirical literature pertaining to the EPU on the stock market reveals mixed and divergent findings, making it difficult to comprehend their relationship. Additionally, the number of studies considering the asymmetric relationship and structure breaks in India are limited. There are only 1 or 2 studies have done till now. So these are the objectives of my study. So basically, we try to find out asymmetrically investing. We try to find out how changes in EPU influence stock prices in India asymmetrically. Then to assess whether rising and falling EPU have different impacts on stock prices in both the short and long run. To determine whether the pandemic had long-term or short-term effects on the stock market, and finally to provide insights and practical implications for investors and policymakers. So for this paper, I have taken data from January 2003 to August 2024, and the data is taken from the website of the Economic Policy Uncertainty that developed by the Baker. And for stock market performance, the study employs the monthly closing figures of the Bombay Stock Exchange Sensex Index. In this study, we also include some of the control variables that could affect the stock market, such as interest rate, exchange rate, inflation rate, and industrial production. So now let's talk about some methodology. So paper employed the nonlinear autoregressive distributive lag model. This is basically an extension of autoregressive distributive lag model. So the main advantage of this application is that through a single equation, both asymmetry and co-integration can be determined. Furthermore, it is applicable to small sample sizes and variables. Okay, and variables with mixed order. And this also eliminates the problem of having the same order of integration as required by the other standard co-integration models. We have also employed the BDS test to utilize the nonlinear dependencies. We have also used the stationary test. We have also employed the stationary test. Chow tests also have been employed to find the structure break. And for presence of short run and long run asymmetry, we have used the wall test. So this is basically results for the BDS test. The outcomes of BDS statistic for all the variables are here. The findings state that the null hypothesis that variables are identically independently distributed is rejected at 1% significance level, thus signifying the nonlinear characteristics of data under different dimensions. And the findings of the unit 2 test, we have used ADF, Phillips Barron, KPS, and Zivot and this test. So the findings of all the tests is that we have mixed order of integration. And this is the result for the bound test. So value is 7.43911, which is quite higher than our lower and upper bound on all the significance level. Hence, it confirms that the co-integration exists. This is the table which is showing the long run estimates of the NARDL. So you can see here that the positive APU, when there is a rise in the APU, it negatively affects the stock prices, and when there is fall in the APU, it positively affects the stock prices. So this confirms basically, now I am interpreting the long run estimates. So this confirms that rise in policy related uncertainties adversely affect the Indian stock market. Now, what are the reasons? So the first reason is the risk averse behavior of Indian investors. As we know that Indian investors is uh, the stock market is still, after so many years, it is still only 2% population of India is related to is investing in the stock market. So the risk averse behavior, that in the period of rising uncertainty, investors' confidence decrease and they become pessimistic about the future cash flows. The other reason is also related to this, that this also generates flight to quality phenomena in the economy, and investors adopt a risk off approach by selling their stocks for safer and more stable assets. And the third reason could be that APO also lead to potential economic slowdown, as corporations tend to act more conservatively during the periods of high uncertainty. So this cautious behavior results in reduced investment in production and employment, ultimately slowing down economic activity. Now, contrastingly, the falling EPU positively impact the stock market, and impact is larger than the falling EPU. The reason is that when uncertainty decreases, it fosters a more stable economic environment, and this stability encourages investment and spending, which can drive economic growth and encourage firms to invest more confidently. The one more interesting thing is that COVID, that is represented by our structural break, does not have a significant impact in the long run, and the effects of COVID-19 are seen as just temporary disruptions in the economy. These are the short-term estimates of the NADL, so I'm only explaining the significant one. So the coefficient of positive APU is statistically significant and negative, indicating that in short run, an increase in APU contemporaneously exert an immediate adverse impact on the Indian stock market. And falling APU raises stock prices after one lag. This represents the conservative and risk-averse behavior of investors, who often delay financial decision as they cautiously evaluate the sustainability of policy improvements before altering their investment portfolios. Finally, the error correction term is significant and negative, represent disequilibrium in the long run will correct at the speed of 11% in every month. And lastly, our structure break, the dummy, the COVID-19 has a significant and adverse impact only in the short run. The reason is that as it triggered short-term panic and volatility in the stock markets worldwide due to fear, uncertainty, and rapid economic contraction. These are the diagnostic tests. The model is free from the autocorrelation and heteroscedasticity. The Kusum and Kusum square is also stable. So conclusion, so our result represents that economic policy uncertainty becomes the most important risk factor, and confirm that government action profoundly impacts the stock markets. Hence, the judgment and decision-making ability of governments in times of crisis is crucial for the stability of the stock markets. And the findings of the study carry practical implications for both the investors and policymakers. Investors can adjust their strategies for falling and rising APU. And for policymakers, the study underscores the importance of reducing policy-related uncertainties through the clear, consistent, and transparent policies. And by doing so, they can foster a stable investment climate, support economic growth, and minimize the adverse effects of policy uncertainty on the stock markets. Thank you.
Thank you, Abdul Moise. Please stand by. There'll be a discussion and hopefully some questions at the end of the next presentation. So we now come actually to the final paper for the day, for the session. This is by Dr. Shahida Parvin from Waseda University in Japan. And those of you who are not familiar, Waseda is a very prominent private university in the Tokyo area, the distinguished university. So welcome. You have 10 minutes.
Can you see my slide?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much for having me. I'm Shahida Parvin. I'm going to present the paper, What Factors Influence Chinese Government Bond Yields? This study was conducted with Dr. Tanvir Akram. So welcome to my presentation. So So the motivation of this paper comes from the fact that John Maynard Keynes' conjecture regarding the relationship between the current short-term interest rate and the long-term interest rate appears to hold for government bond yields in major advanced countries and several emerging markets as well. Does Keynes' conjecture on market interest rate dynamics also hold for Chinese government bond yields? This is the research question for this study. So this is how I framed the presentation, but in the interest of time, I will skip many slides. Before diving into the detail, let me tell you a short summary of this study. Keynes argued that central banks' actions have a decisive influence on long-term government bond yields through the current short-term interest rate. Empirical studies have shown that Keynes' conjecture holds in major advanced countries and regions and some emerging markets. In this study, we examine whether the same empirical pattern holds for China. We use ARDL model for this estimation. And we find that Keynes' conjecture holds in China as well. This means that Chinese policymakers have considerable leeway despite a fixed exchange rate regime. So what are the Keynes conjecture and literature tells us? The central bank targets its policy rate, which drives short-term interest rate. Monetary policy influences the long-term interest rate through the short-term interest rate. So Keynes Keynes states that the influence of short-term interest rate on the long-term interest rate is much greater than anyone would have expected. This is stated in the book Treatise on Money. In the same book, it is stated that there is no reason to doubt the ability of a central bank to make its short-term interest rate effective in the market. And Keynes' perspective was influenced by the Reffler's empirical research that he stated the surprising fact is not that long-term bond yields are relatively stable in comparison to short-term interest rates, but they have reflected fluctuations in short-term interest rates so strikingly and to such a considerable extent. This is the hint how the short-term interest rate is important for long-term interest rate. So these are the literatures. I'm not going to talk much about this. So you might have known that Chinese government bond is the world largest. So I will present some stylized fact to convince you why this research is important. The outstanding Chinese government bond amount to $25 trillion in recent time, which is equivalent to 3.4 trillion US dollar. Sorry, 25 trillion Chinese yuan, which is equivalent to 3.4 trillion US dollar. Chinese central government debt is around 25% in with regard to nominal GDP. And Chinese government gross debt is about 70, close to 80%. And the lending and borrowing rate is below zero over this period. This is about central government debt ratio, which is above 25% of nominal GDP. So the Chinese government debt and lending borrowing ratio and the size of Chinese government bond tells us how important studying Chinese government bond is. So from now on, these are some stylized facts. I'm not going to explain much. These are the variables that have been used in this study. This is the dependent variable. These are some of the independent variables that have been used, such as
5 minutes left.
Sure. Core inflation, CPI, industrial production, evolution of the exchange rate in terms of US dollar and euro. These are stock price in Shanghai and Shenzhen. And this is People's Bank of China's balance sheet. the balance sheet is important because this is a good indicator for the size of bond. So these are the stylized facts. Probably it gives us good motivation. Actually, this gave us much motivation to study this topic. Let me talk a bit about data, and then I will move into the move on to the method. So we used short-term interest rate as independent variable, and the short-term interest rates are 3 months and 6 months treasury bill. And our dependent variable is long-term interest rate that we measure in terms of 3-year, 5-year, 10-year, and 7-year and 10-year long-term interest rate. And these are some of the control variables that include CPI, core CPI, industrial production, exchange rate, and stock exchange, and central bank's balance sheet. We have 200 observations, and our data is monthly. We applied AREL model. In this model, this is Chinese government bond yields, and these bonds are for 3 months, 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, and 10 years. Our independent variable is 3-month treasury bill and 6 months treasury bill. We use lag up to 3, and in the estimation, most of the cases, the model chose 2 lag using archaic information criteria, and these are some control variables. So let me explain the results slightly because I have a time shortage. This result is for a 3-year Chinese government bond. The first column a control only for core CPI and industrial production, and the second column explain the model with more control variables. And our interest variable is this one that we see the short-term interest rate, that is 3-month treasury bill, has positive association with the 3-year Chinese government bond. This is for 10-year Chinese government bond, and the result, the direction of the result is same. The direction of the result is same, but the magnitude is slightly different. And after controlling for different relevant variables, the result doesn't change much. This is for 6-month treasury bill, and this these 4 columns are the result for 3-year Chinese government bonds, 5-year, 7-year, and 10-year Chinese government bond. And in all the cases, the result is the same, that short-term interest rate is positively associated with the long-term interest rate. And this is for, the first one is for 5-year treasury bill, 5-year and this is for 7-year, and the result is the same. So let me conclude the study. An increase in the interest, an increase or decrease in the current short-term interest rate has the positive association with the that is the increase or decrease in Chinese government bond yields after controlling for several variables. 2 different models of CGB yields from across the CGB.
It looks very last time. Then the another thing I didn't understand, like, your discussion when you discussed on the impact of interest rate on price level or exchange rate. Those discussions were not rigorous or in-depth enough. So, like, what the results mean, or for example, one thing is that the impact of interest rate on price level or exchange rate seems to be very extremely small, like the magnitude. So, if you could explain, like, what are the results? What does that mean? That would be, better for the regions. Then another part is, I understand the data limitations, but alternative models like Bayesian bar could be another option you could just look at, like whether that will improve your paper. And so while the study focuses on short-term responses, it lacks a clear discussion on the long-run effects of monetary shocks. So are the observed effects persistent, or do they, dissipate quickly? And then the limitations of SVAR model, structural VAR model, for example, identity restrictions, heterogeneity constants, those should be explicitly acknowledged, and also with the suggestions for future research directions. Now, the third paper by Dr. Yunus and Dr. Roy, so the time varying causality between money supply growth and inflation in Bangladesh. I really enjoyed the paper. It's a very, very interesting one because the time varying causality, it's a very latest thing that we see in academic discourse. So the major areas of improvement that I see, one is consideration of additional inflation determinants. For example, in your study, you have actually acknowledged that only money supply is not the major driver of inflation when you consider Bangladesh, because the first graph that you show us, there is a clear distinction. Like when the money supply was increasing, inflation was going the opposite direction. So if you could add any other indicator that can capture the dynamics, maybe that can complete the model. Then the long-run versus short-run effects. Your study effectively identifies the time-varying, short-run relationship, but it lacks a discussion on whether this causal linkages hold in the long run. So you could expand the analysis using conjugation techniques like Johnson conjugation or VECM to assess the long-run relationship between money supply and inflation. But I think there are already some studies on that, but you can bring those literature in a paper just to show that how you're filling the gaps basically. And lastly, that while your study highlights the time-varying nature of causality, it doesn't explicitly decide how policymakers should respond to this dynamic. So a more detailed discussion on how monetary authorities can adjust policies in different economic contexts, for example, expansion versus contraction periods, that would strengthen the policy levels of your study. So the fourth paper is by Abdul Muiz, Asymmetric Nexus between Economic Policy Uncertainty and the Indian Stock Market. So in a paper there, first one is the data consistency. Like in the abstract, you mentioned that your data is till 2024 month 8, but in your table where you present the descriptive statistics, it ends in 2021 month 8. So those clarifications can be like whether the data was extended post 2021 should be there. Your so another comment is provide a clear exposition of the why you are adopting NRDL model framework, like and just a clear description of what this model does. For example, decomposition of positive and negative EPU shocks, so that readers who are unfamiliar with non-linear model has a grasp. Then so some more explanation why some controls, for example, industrial productions are insignificant in the long run without the readers. So link the results to economic theory or contextual factors. Then another comment is so in your the time frame that you have taken there are multiple structural effects, like while COVID-19 is emphasized. Other than that, there were demonetization in India, GST. So so measuring them and testing them could make some richer insights. And I have some more comments, but okay. Let me add finish with these two. One is visual clarity. In your paper, your figure numbers were missing, your table numbers were missing, so it was really hard for me to sometimes follow which figure or which table you're referencing to. And some citations were not inconsistent, so just pay close attention to that as well. Last paper by Shahida Bhatt or Shahida Parveen, and it's a fantastic paper. I enjoyed your paper. Your paper, you really a Keynesian perspective when examining the relationship between the short-term interest rate and the yields on long-term Chinese government bonds. So, from my point of view, I thought this paper could be improved from a couple of points of view. Firstly, the literature review could be strengthened by including some more recent studies, especially those focusing on emerging economics. So this would assist in contextualizing the research within the current academic discourse. Secondly, while the robustness checks using alternative proxies for the short-term interest rates are valuable, additional checks with different model specifications and sample periods could further validate the findings. And lastly, while your article touches on policy implications of the findings, a more in-depth discussions of these implications, particularly in the context of China's unique economic conditions, would be very much beneficial. So I think I'm ending before my 10-minute time. Thank you so much.
A big hand for the discussant, Mahtab. I think he did a remarkable job in discussing all 5 papers in fair depth and in fairness to all. Good comments on all the papers. So please, the authors, hang on to these comments, and we'll come back to you. You will have at least 2 minutes each to respond. And but we will first take this time we now go paper by paper. So if somebody has a burning question on more than one paper, they can speak twice. But we'll first come to the first presentation by Shiva Paudel, and I'll take my privilege to ask 1 or 2 make questions or comments on each paper. I don't do any econometrics at this time. All I did is my students, I'm too old to do that kind of stuff. I still do some maths, but even that is becoming challenging. So I'll make some conceptual remarks on each of the papers. So on the Nepalese stock market, the first question is the real versus nominal interest rates, nominal rate yields, so that you have not, I think everything is nominal in a model, and you're looking at the impact of on the stock market returns. And usually stock market returns are defined net of the risk-free rate. That at one stroke deals with inflation growth. Okay, so that you separate that out, then you have already a real rate, and then actually the price of risk, so to speak. Okay, so it'd be interesting to see whether your results hold if your dependent variable becomes the net yield is actually net of risk-free rate. It's a time-honored concept. As you know that from the New York Stock Exchange for last, before COVID, the 50, 60-year different result was something like 5% real return over and above the risk-free rate. Okay. The other issue is the large role of India in Nepalese economy. And for example, the FDI is mostly a large amount of FDI is from India, and therefore the role of this any policy changes or any policy shock in India vis-a-vis Nepalese economy, that is, and as it happens, plays out at different times, or has played out different times. So that part isn't there. So the question of not only the impact of the Nepalese decisions on Nepalese stock market, but the global shocks, and particularly in this case, regional shocks. So that could be a new angle here. Okay, so I've spoken enough. So we have at least time for 2 questions on each paper from the floor. So on Paudel's paper. So if you please say your name and 1 minute for 1 question. No comment, no summary, just a question.
I'm Ruhani Rahman, and I have a question for Dr. Shivaraj Paudel. How were the 14 funds selected? Do they cover different industries, or are they biased towards some specific sectors? And why were monthly or quarterly data not used instead of annual data? Would higher frequency data provide more accurate results? That's it.
Thank you. Very good. At least one more question. No more questions on Carlos' paper? All right. So perhaps we should give him a chance to respond right away before you. So if you speak 1 or 2 minutes, you don't have to answer everything. Whatever you think is quickly say something, do so. Otherwise, we can discuss it beyond the seminar.
Thank you, Chair. And I'm also like to thank thanks. I probably that's why I would like to say Dr. Saab, yes. Is any problem by saying that? No. In Nepali, we say Dr. Saab, yes, for respect. And she had also raised similar kind of question. So I want to give same result to the both of you. Yes, Nepali capital market is mostly dominated by the banking and financial institutions. If I had been selected randomly, only the samples from the banking and BFIS in banking, finance, and banking and financial institutions also will be selected. That's why I had thought, or I have I have grouped all the forms into 3 groups. That is sectoral analysis. I have made that we can say cross-sectional analysis. That one is banking and financial institution, one is insurance institution, and the other sample rather than BFIS and the insurance. So the sampling method is purposive to avoid the sampling error. So in order to test whether there is the sampling error or not in the analysis, I have conducted a correlation analysis for the sample return and the market return. And what we found that I have also described clearly in my presentation that sampling from the different sectoral units or cross-section units, the sampling return and the market return are the highly correlated. That's why there is no any sampling error in the data set. And I want to go to the another question of Dr. Saab. Why wireless rather using one effect, random effect or fixed effect model? If I have to use or I have to examine the impact on different cross-section unit, or means different individual sample unit and the time year to year, at that time I have to use fixed effect model, and on that also one-way fixed effect model and two-way fixed effect model. But my objective is to examine the impact of such macroeconomic variable on common stock return as a whole on an average. That's why the result can be obtained from the OAS only. That's why I have not used one-way fixed effect or two-way fixed effect or random effect model. And regarding the conceptual framework, he has given me the suggestion. Okay, I will amend all the suggestion in the final copy of paper before get published. I think this is sufficient for the presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Pardal. Okay, now we turn to the second paper on by Afsara Tasnim on macro variables and interest rate shocks. Here I will again open with 1 or 2 brief remarks. And the first point is that we have a kind of asymmetry in the Bangladesh macroeconomy. That in terms of the transmission mechanism, if we look at although while the investment side, almost all investment is bank borrowing. They don't. There's no domestic bond market for companies to borrow. They have not been using it so far, and equity access is limited, And after a lot of prodding, many companies have gone public, and they use it limited in a rather reluctant manner to raise funds from the capital market. So that gives a huge exposure to the banks, and as you can see today, there are banks in a very weak position. So it would seem, and it is proven by various anecdotal and actual evidence, that the interest rate really hasn't affected much in how much they want to borrow. These are all non-economic decisions, non-profit-making decisions. They give loans to people they are told to give it to, or they like, or whatever, some collusive outcome. And so the excessive amount of borrowing by companies, and one would imagine that the interest rate wouldn't play much of a role because they don't really plan to pay it back. If you don't plan to pay it back, the terms of the loan doesn't really matter. On the other hand, the asymmetry is at the consumption side. If you're a genuine consumer, except for house building, very hard to borrow money. Very hard to go to bank, say, look, I want to go to Bangkok for some, say, health treatment or whatever it is, and you want 5 lakh rupees. Very hard to get that as a person. So people take recourse to credit cards, which are very costly ways of borrowing. And so this asymmetry is there. So so the question really is that what are you going to determine out of this kind of analysis when we have this gap in the two major components of consumption savings? And also I was wondering whether the data period you have includes this negative interest rate period in terms of real negative interest rate in borrowing in our context, which is unusual, which was brought on by this 9% ceiling. And there's a sustained period of several months, almost maybe 3 quarters, where the real interest rate was actually negative. All right, so this is some food for thought. You can think about them. And we have, again, appealed to the audience to have 1 or 2 questions on this paper, maximum 1 minute per presenter. Please say your name and the question.
Thank you, sir. I'm Khandokar Naganjan Brahman, Department of Economics, University of Dhaka. I have three simultaneous questions for Afsar Hussain, ma'am. First is, how should Bangladesh balance inflation control with investment promotion? And second, would inflation targeting be a better approach than interest rate targeting? And third is, should Bangladesh remove the interest rate cap to allow for market-driven rates? Thank you.
I need to repeat the second question.
Yes, sure. Would inflation targeting be a better approach than interest rate targeting?
Thank you. One more quick question, comment? If not, you can quickly answer. Just take 1 or 2 minutes. We are hitting the clock. Okay. By the way.
First, I'd like Thank you, sir, pointing out the issues regarding the literature review. I did literature review, but I couldn't incorporate it into my slides, sorry, due to the time constraint, but I need to do more in-depth analysis regarding the literature review. And regarding the magnitude of my impulses, yes, while running impulse response function, I actually keep 10 periods, meaning 10 years. I have seen that the effect of the shock vanishes after the 10 periods. That's why I couldn't make it to 10 to 20, and I couldn't further test it. But I will further test it using 20 or 30 periods. And one question was the long run restriction. Since this study applied recursive ordering, which is actually the short run effects. So that's why I couldn't incorporate long run effects. And your third question, your question to answer to your question, the inflation targeting. I use interest rate targeting. So it is not I think my research question only led to interest rate targeting. So which is I said that modern central bank uses interest rate, which is more effective. They said that's why actually I use interest rate, not inflation rate targeting. I think.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. So that is great. Now we turn to these online presentations. The first is by Dr. Roy. And are you still there?
Dr. Roy, can you hear us?
Yes, yes, I am.
Okay. All right. Thank you. So I have a comment and think about it and speak to your colleague, Dr. Sarah, who was actually my colleague too. I was in Central Bank for 2 years, advisor back in 2005 to 7. Anyhow, my observation here is that the role of saving behavior, I mean, the money stock and the savings in the following perspective, that we have a large amount of remittances coming in every year, every day, as a matter of fact. And part of it is through official channels, part of it through unofficial channels. And the money supply changes in response to any inflow of funds into the country. Now, the question is whether the saving behavior, if the people come, the money that comes in from abroad and the recipients spend it all, the impact on the aggregate demand is different than if they save a large part of it. I mean, the question really is the possible differential saving behavior out of ordinary income and of remittances. So if that's hypothesis, if somebody's analyzed that, I don't know. So that'd be an interesting angle to pursue and see whether the money stock is responding appropriately or not, or whether the money stock growth is actually inflationary. So that's just a comment on that. And the other thing was when I was in Central Bank, we tried to measure, develop a measure of core inflation. And I think it happened at some point later on. And I wonder why you didn't focus on core inflation as a measure of inflation in your regressions. Okay. So that's it from now, from my perspective. And we have time for, again, 1 or 2 questions from the audience. So again, in 1 minute, please. Yes, thank you.
Good afternoon, sir. This is Najmul Arnab. I was at Salem and also at University of Dhaka. I have actually 2 questions. The first question is, sir, I don't want to criticize it, but I want to give a remark that since modern monetary economics suggests multiple inflation drivers.
Sorry, I can't hear you. Can you a bit louder?
Am I audible
now? Yeah, but not so clear.
Just in front of the laptop.
Just say it quickly. Maybe you can say in Bangla also. It's convenient.
Am I audible now?
Yeah.
Okay. So since modern monetary economics suggests multiple inflation drivers, should the paper consider Phillips curve dynamics versus Keynesian perspectives? And I have a following question as well. How does velocity of money affect inflation in Bangladesh? I think you got it, right?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So
should I start?
Yeah, go ahead. Yes, in 1 or 2 minutes maximum.
I'm starting from the audience. Yeah.
Please do.
We are starting from the traditional money supply quantity theory of money relationship. That's MV is equal to PT. And we are imposing 2 strong assumptions here. That's velocity is stationary. And the second assumption is coming from the traditional quantity theory of money, which assumes that there's no long-run relationship between money supply and and real variables. So these 2, our results are based on these 2 assumptions. But as robustness check, we included more variables. You know that Bangladesh Bank is currently following the interest rate targeting. So now inflation should be more sensitive to interest rate rather than money supply. So that's happening now. We have not showed our robustness check results, but as we complete the paper, you can see that all the results are there. And another comment from Sir, our responses is that we are calculating, we are getting core inflation data, but we don't have a very long sample for that. So it has been studied recently. So that's why core inflation is not there, because it's destroying our results. So mainly the inflation, food and non-food inflation results are there. And you have another point on remittances and inflation, I guess. So I think that's not related to our paper here, but I have some works on impact of remittances on inflation in different papers. So what we argued there is that when remittances is coming, it's inducing aggregate demand for the recipient households. So that's stimulating inflation in some way. But another point is that when this money is coming, they are also being used for human development or other activities. So the households which are getting remittances, they're getting more productive. So there are also some aggregate supply angle rather than the aggregate demand angle. So that's all from me, sir. And thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, I just realized that we have some audience perhaps online, and if one of you can
So we're checking for
at the end whether they have any questions. Yes. All right. So we now turn to a paper by Dr. Moise and Professor Akhtar on the policy uncertainty. And here I have just one observation, and that is how do you distinguish? I know you did deal with the COVID health shock. Now, since the stock market responds to any other shock, how do you separate or identify other shocks, global shocks, national shocks, which are not health related? So before and after COVID, whether there's any way of identifying the health shock from the other shocks. But overall, your comment or your conclusion that the timely response to shocks by policymaking authorities are very important. That's, I think, well taken. So here again, do you have a question from the audience for the quiz? Wonderful. We have at least one question. So it's been a very successful session that way, as if we have already set up in a way that somebody will stand up and ask a question. Please do. 1 minute.
I'm Arshad, and I have a question from Mr. Abdul Moise, and congratulations on your paper. So my question is, does the relationship between EPU and the stock market differ pre and post global finance crisis of 2008 and pre and post COVID-19? Would a time varying parameter model provide deeper insights? Thank you.
So you can, Dr. Moise, you have 1 or 2 minutes to respond if you wish to. Please.
Okay, sir. Am I audible, sir?
Yes.
Okay. So start with the question from one of the student there. So he was basically asking whether there is whether there is a difference between before the global financial crisis and now. So basically, in our study, we have only considered the COVID-19 as a structure break. And for identification of the structure break, we have used the Chow test. So yes, we have not worked on this kind of difference, whether there is where there is some other things in before and after. But as I already said in the paper, that the EPU, the COVID effect is only a temporary phenomena. It was not a permanent kind of effect. So that's why I don't find that that it has some effect on the stock markets.
All right. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. So we now go to the last paper, and Dr. Shahida Parveen, I think she's still here with us. I have one observation on your or 2 observations on your presentation, and that is the short and long run, and the role of inflation expectations. As you'd agree that the way the mechanism is to influence the long run interest rate, which is depends on the outcome of the long run inflation, and through the inflation expectations. If people expect inflation to be low, they don't demand a lot of yield from holding on to long-term bonds. So whether, I mean, what way you can take into account of the changes in inflation expectations at different points in the economic cycle. As you know that the before COVID, the long run interest rates in the globally, especially in the US, was extremely low, nearly zero. And that's because the inflation was supposed to be totally beaten. It was remaining below 2%, and the expectations were the same. And that was all upended by the COVID pandemic. And the second observation is that the allegation in the Western world, at least, with some justification, that the Chinese exchange rate have been manipulated, is stable, but has been manipulated to remain undervalued Chinese currency to boost their exports. So to the extent that is correct, so that the exchange rate is not a very appropriate variable in your model. So if you can think about that, not necessarily comment at this time, but think about that. And while you wait for a question or two from the audience, this is the last week of the session. Oh, indeed, you have two hands, so I'll take both. Please, 1 minute each. Please, thank you.
Good afternoon. I am Nafisana Lohana, a student of first year Department of Economics,
I think you have to come.
University of Dhaka.
Can you hear, Shahida, can you hear that? Please come here.
I
Both of-
can hear, but not very clear.
Okay, not audible. Okay, all right. Not clear.
Now am I audible?
Yeah.
But
Okay, thank you.
State of yours too.
I'm Nafisana Lohana. I actually have two questions for you, ma'am. The first one is, should China move towards a more flexible interest rate system in order to enhance bond market efficiency? And following that, I would like to ask, how can policymakers exactly balance bond market stability with economic growth objectives? I hope I was clear.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Second question.
Hi, Madhurika, and my question is, did the study account for capital flows, foreign reserves, or bond market liquidity measures? Thank you.
Sorry, I didn't get it. Can you please repeat?
Did the study account for capital flows, foreign reserves, or bond market liquidity measures?
Okay, thank you.
Yep, thank you. So, Shahida, you have 2 minutes to respond to any and all of these questions.
Thank you. First, let me start with the audience. Should China move to flexible exchange rate system? It's very much political thing, I guess. It's difficult for me to say that because I think it's suggested from most of the experts, but it's the Chinese policymakers' stance. Probably yes, but from this model, we don't really guide on that way. And how the policymaker react, react to, sorry, what is that? Policymaker react to, what was that? Not flexible exchange rate.
My second question was, how can policymakers balance bond market stability with economic growth objectives?
Okay, thank you. So you know that bond market is related to so many things, including the housing prices, right? So recently, housing price is adjusting. It's kind of declining. So the price of asset and the interest rate is negatively related, as you may know. Considering many other factors, including the asset price, interest rates, and other important variable, the government need to react. So probably at this point, keeping bond yield low is one of the government's target. And in that regard, government policymaker can influence mostly the short-term interest rate. So if the government want to keep the long-term yield rate low, they can influence that through short-term interest rate. So if they can keep the short-term interest rate low, they can keep the long-term interest rate low. So government choose to change their policy that affect the short-run interest rate. That is the recommendation from this finding. I think I hope it answers your question. Then if I have accounted for capital flow and some other variables, I controlled only for a few variables you have seen, not for capital flow or other things. I controlled for central bank's balance. I control for the variables that we felt is really important for finance and macroeconomic indicators, including the inflation, including the exchange rate, and the balance sheet. So that are the variables. Yeah, we may think of capital flow and other variables that you have mentioned. We have not controlled for those in the model. And yeah, I think these are broadly the questions.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Shraddha. So what we have concluded the session now. Everyone has all the speakers have spoken, and we thank everyone for being here. I think in spite of 5 other sessions going on, we'll be a sizable audience here in front of us. So I thank you all, and thank the speakers, the discussant of Mahtab, and the rest of us. So a big hand for all of us, especially presenters. Thank you so much for this.
We have 30 minutes for the.
Oh, the